So again, welcome to this English Alumni Panel. I would like to start by introducing our department chair, Professor Susan Williams, who wanted to give a short intro to it. And then I will introduce our panelists and we'll hear from them about their career paths and how they got from the English B.A. to where they are now. So Professor Williams.
Hi, everyone. I am Susan Williams. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to join our panel and to welcome all of you on behalf of the department. I am a professor of American literature, and I've been teaching at Ohio State for almost 30 years, so I probably had some overlap with our guests. And I've been the chair of the department since January. And one of my most pleasurable experiences is talking to our alumni and also to our students about how to connect what you're learning in the classroom with what happens after you leave the classroom. And I'm just so grateful to have our guests with us to talk a little bit about their journey. And so Genghis and Carrie, thank you so much for being here. Genghis, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I think that's where you are. So welcome to a fellow Atlantan. And Carrie, I also, after I went to college, before I went back to graduate school, lived in Washington, D.C. So I can picture kind of where you are as well. And I just want to say to the students that I hope you listen to these journeys and think about what that means in terms of all of the ways in which what we're studying in ways you predict and can't predict will help you as you move on through what comes after college, even as we try to finish this amazing year where we've been in during the pandemic. And I'm glad so much that we've had this time together. And Katie, I appreciate your putting this together, and I'll give it back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Susan. So I'm thrilled, like I said, I'm just gonna keep saying that. I'm thrilled that you're all here joining us for this panel to hear from two of our fabulous alumni who are speaking about their career paths. We love to welcome all of our alumni back, and we especially love to hear about their journeys since they've been at Ohio State and what they've done since graduation. We always say that there's nothing that you can't do with an English degree, but how you carve out that exact path from the English degree can be really daunting. And so that's why we're delighted to have our panelists here to share their stories. Your journey might not look exactly like theirs, but we hope that they inspire you to find your own specific route. So as some of you know, we usually hold an annual alumni dinner where we gather to hear about hear from our alumni. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we were not able to hold that event this year, but we've found a silver lining in that. Since we're not bound by location, we're really thrilled to welcome alumni back from different areas of the country. And so one of our panelists is in Atlanta, Georgia, and one of our panelists is in Washington, D.C. And so I'm really excited to be able to connect with people from across the country. So I'm pleased to introduce our two alumni tonight. So with us, we have Genghis Shakaan. Shakaan, I think, right? Yes? Okay. All right. He hails from the Buckeye State. He holds a B.A. in English, an M.A. in English Literature, and M.Ed. in Secondary Education Administration, all of which he earned from the Ohio State University. Genghis also holds a J.D. from Atlanta's John Marshall Law School. Professionally, Genghis has served as an educator, assistant principal, and instructional specialist in Ohio, Georgia, New York, and Washington, D.C., respectively. He's also served his country as a former Marine Reservist in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He currently works as a lawyer and owns his own firm, Shakhan and Wilkerson Divorce and Family Law, and practices out of his Atlanta, Macon, Georgia-based offices. So thank you and welcome, Genghis. We also have Carrie Charbonneau, who is a human capital manager with Deloitte's government and public sector practice. Since joining Deloitte, she has supported the Department of Defense, the DoD, through multiple efforts, including the development of multiple DoD policies, as well as the execution of performance-based sustainment solutions for weapons systems and aircraft platforms. Carrie has also led a brand evaluation for Semper Fi Fund and a human-centered design sprint for Wounded Warrior Project. Most recently, Carrie led the Navy's effort to redesign its detailing process and implement an overhaul of its human resources systems. Additionally, Carrie utilizes her experience as a caregiver to support Deloitte's veteran and wounded warrior efforts as a volunteer at the Warrior Games, service trials, and veteran affairs clinics. Carrie earned a Master's of Public Administration from American University and a BA in English and Public Affairs from The Ohio State University. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, Steve, and 2 dogs. We will begin by each of our alumni speaking about their career paths. Like I said, how they got from their Ohio State BA in English to where they are today. Then afterwards, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So I have some questions that were submitted ahead of time. Thank you to those of you who did submit. And we encourage attendees to submit questions here. To submit a question, please click the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and submit a comment or question. We may not be able to respond to every comment or question, but we'll do our best to address as many as possible. So thank you again to everyone. I'm going to turn my camera off in a minute, and I will be back when we do Q&A, or actually when we switch over speakers. And Genghis, let's start with you. So thank you again.
All righty, thank you for the invite, Katie. Of course, you would invite me on the year that there's a pandemic and I don't get to indulge in the dinner. So I appreciate that. 2020 has been great. But just to tell you a little bit about my journey, I'm going to give you guys the abbreviated version because we could sit here all day long talking a little bit about adventure time for Genghis. But I began my journey as actually, as Katie mentioned, I'm from Columbus and graduated from East High School. I received a athletic scholarship to attend Bowling Green, a football scholarship. I did Bowling Green for 2 years, transferred to Central State for about a year, and then I came into Ohio State as a junior, I believe. I stayed at Siebert Hall, I believe that was on 11th Avenue, across from Catfish Biths and Jesse Owens South, if memory serves me well. Part of my Ohio State journey, I really learned to become a student athlete and really emphasize the student part of it. I spent a lot of time at the Science and Engineering Technology Library. I think it was a 24-hour library for engineering and science students. And I got really serious about my academics. I remember taking 5 classes, I believe, at one point in time. You guys are still in the quarter system, which was an overload. I had to get permission from the dean, and I still managed to make dean's list. And so part of the way I became an English major, actually, it was kind of by happenstance, and just I did not plan. I did not make a decision, a conscious decision, to come to college and major in English. I actually began as a psychology major. After about 3 years or so, give or take, I went to my advisor and I took a look at my transcript, and I had all these English courses on it. I didn't understand why I kept finding myself in the Shakespeare classes or, American Lit, African American Lit, but it was a passion, British Lit. And I really just contemporary film study, those classes and courses, it just really resonated with me. And so I found myself, I did change my major, became an English major, and really just after I had that, I guess, epiphany, if you will, kind of rededicated my life to trying to be a great student, with a focus in particular focus in English Lit. I really was drawn to a lot of post-colonial literature. And so I did just happen to do really, really well. From there, I went on to apply to the master's program and was accepted. My professional goal at the time was to be a college professor. I really aspired, and I still do, that's a goal of mine one day, to be a college professor. But at the time, I was focused on just the mid-graduate level MA. I did complete the MA program. However, I did take a detour. I was in danger of becoming a professional student. And so, because I loved Ohio State so much, I didn't want to, be one of those kids that was, 30 and hadn't really had any real world experience since graduating from high school. I'm not going to say real world experience. That doesn't sound right, but I think you guys kind of know what I mean. And so I switched over to the education program, mastering in education, to focus on becoming an educator for a while, to kind of underwrite the cost, if you will, of my education, as opposed to relying on Sally Mae and Great Lakes to fund that for me. So I did that. I graduated and actually took a job with the Columbus City School District, became a teacher. And then from there, I actually was accepted to the PhD program at Ohio State. And so I was in the process of pursuing it. And 9/11 happened, if I'm not mistaken, and I ended up joining the Marine Corps. And so I was part of a 325 Lima company in Columbus, Ohio. We deployed, I was with the infantry unit, we deployed to Iraq. So I actually did not return to the PhD program. And I later relocated. I'm going to fast forward a bit. Ended up in D.C., lived in Brooklyn, New York, lived in Southern California, went to Georgia twice. Now I'm in Georgia a second time. And so I ended up in law school. When I was a graduate, actually when I graduated from undergrad, Ohio State offered a program. It was a JD PhD program, a joint program. And it was the program I was interested in. I want to say it might have been a 5-year program. I'm not sure if they still offer it. However, I did apply to it. I was accepted to the PhD program, but I think I was waitlisted for the JD program. But anyway, it was to go to law school was always another passion of mine. And to be honest with you, after working for other people for so long, I really wanted to work for myself. And so that's what kind of drove me to pursue the JD, because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So you'll have to forgive me if my phone rings or any of my devices go off, because the life of an entrepreneur is very unpredictable, very long hours, but it's very, 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 very rewarding. But you don't get a lot of sleep, and it's a lot of work. So that's how I kind of arrived where I am today. Again, that is the short version. The longer version would have to be over some probably fermented beverages. I don't know if all of you are of age to indulge, but and maybe a couple of stogies. But that is my journey in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. And so I said I was going to turn my camera off so everybody didn't just have this person like nodding and laughing, kind of in the background. And I was still doing that even though my camera was off. So thank you so much. What I love about that, your kind of journey, is it shows like, what I always tell our English majors, trust in yourself and like in figuring out what you want to do. And, what you start off wanting to do might not be kind of, your dreams might change along the way. And so I love that your story kind of illustrates that it's, you can have many different pathways and many different dreams and kind of pursue them in different ways. And so I think that's so wonderful to hear about someone putting that into practice. Yes. So thank you so much. And so Carrie, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey now. I'm going to turn my camera off again and I'll come back for Q&A too.
Awesome. Okay, so again, I'm Carrie Charbonneau, as Katie mentioned. So my journey is a little bit different than Genghis. When I came to Ohio State in 2008, I was very certain of what I wanted to do, which was teach high school English. And I had that path and that was it. So I started with my English courses right away. I was lucky enough to have, some college credit for my high school classes, dove into the major, loved it, did the literary locations class a few times. Also, just really enjoyed it. Started to explore other aspects of humanities. Started taking Spanish classes. And then my sophomore year, in the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I thought to myself, okay, I need to kind of get some of this real world experience so I can get my teaching career along the way. And I student taught for the summer and I hated every single second of it. And so kind of had this like, oh crap moment, like, what am I going to do with myself? And so kind of started to, think about other avenues. At that point, the John Glenn School was only for graduate students. So I was only able to take a few of their intro classes, did a few of those, and realized like I liked government, I liked policy, was interested in politics. To beat Ohio State in 2008 when Obama won was such an amazing experience, and to be able to campaign And so I thought about, maybe that's something I'd be interested in pursuing. So the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I did the internship program that the John Glenn School has, and actually was able to leverage kind of my education background, my English background, and do an internship with the US Department of Education, and live in DC for the summer. And so did that and realized that the government certainly needs a lot of help. And the best way to help them is from the inside. And so at that point, as a junior going to my senior year, completely changed course. I was really close to being done with my English degree, and picked up another degree with the John Glenn School, was able to kind of roll in enough of my prerequisites that I was able to finish on time. And so started thinking about that path. And, at that point, was thinking, do I want to work in politics initially? Do I want to campaign? What do I want to do? And thought about Teach for America for a little while, got really serious about that. And then thought about grad school, talked to a lot of the professors in the English department about my opportunities, and ended up, pursuing the grad school route while I was working at the Ohio State House in my senior year, and ended up picking American University, got my master's of public admin, spent a lot of time both working on the Hill during my grad degree, working for Senator Jack Reed, working at the Export-Import Bank, and then I, thought, maybe consulting is interesting. That seems cool. Deloitte was doing some campus recruiting. And at that point, I had never been paid for an internship. And so thought, if they're going to pay me a stipend, maybe I could try this out. So went that route, ended up getting a summer associate position at Deloitte in 2013 between my first and second year of grad school. And that was it. The rest was history. Loved it so much. I originally thought I would stay for 2 years, like everybody says in DC. And then it was 2 years more. And then I got married, and now I guess I'm a lifer. So I'm kind of at the mid-year point of my Deloitte career. I've been here for 8 years, across the span, and 6 years full time. So have kind of learned a lot, but a lot of it, all started with my English degree and having that humanities background that got me where I was today.
Great. Thank you so much. Another thing that I always tell students is, sometimes it's just as important to figure out what you don't want to do as it is to figure out what you do want to do. And so that experience of saying, oh my goodness, this is actually not what I want to do. And now kind of what do I want to do, and the flexibility to change that, is sort of perfect. So great. Thank you. So just a reminder to our attendees, please feel free to use the Q&A button in the bottom to add some questions, or if you have any questions for our panelists. But we did have some in advance. And so I will start. I have two for one for each of you. And so what we can do is I'll ask your kind of individual questions, and then I have some questions kind of for both of you to respond to. So first, so Genghis, how did majoring in English prepare you for law school? And I know a lot of our students are kind of either thinking about law school or thinking about pre-law. And so how did you see your kind of English degree as prepping you for that?
Well, it's a great deal of writing. And so I know that a lot of people's ideas of the law and of attorneys is, in the courtroom. But in end, I will say this, of course, there are attorneys in all areas of people activity, right? So there are government attorneys, obviously there are people who do medical malpractice. I happen to do family law. But a lot of what we do is writing. And so whether we're filing motions, drafting arguments, it is, and I think that having that background in writing, though it wasn't as, for me, it wasn't as focused. And I know when I was there, I think the English department, there was rhetoric and composition and kind of more of the artistic, the literature. And I wish I had done a little bit more of the rhetoric and composition. However, having done so much writing and critical analysis, because the critical analysis piece is really important, I felt like I had a leg up, if you will. The thing I probably would have done differently is the style of writing, of course, is different. For the legal profession, whereas, it's not so much a main idea or maybe thesis driven with topic sentences details. I think we used to, I'm trying to remember my education days. We talked about fried facts, reasons, incidents, examples, and details. Still got it up here for my students when I was an English teacher at East High School in Linden McKinley. But we do more Iraq and CREAC in law. So Iraq is issues, rules, analysis or application and conclusion, whereas CREAC is conclusion, rules, explanation, application, conclusion. So the style of writing is different. And so for me, making that transition was a little challenging because of the way I had written as of course, as an English major, but I think the volume of writing that I did as an English major really prepared me and helped me make that transition.
Great. Yes, I think, being able to write is always, I think, a great skill.
Yes.
So yeah. Carrie, so I have a question about managing for you, but I also wanted to know, and so this is partially something that I'm kind of curious about, but it's also something I know our students have asked me about. And so I've said to students, I'm like, oh, it sounds like you might be interested in consulting. And they're like, consulting, what's that? And I have an answer for that, but since you are in consulting, I thought it would be great to hear an answer from someone who's actually an expert in the field and who does that. So could you tell us a little bit about kind of like what you do as a consultant and like what consulting is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that until you really get into the field, you have this idea of what it is, and then you get there and it's totally changed. And so consultants are, at the end of the day, we're kind of like jack of all trades. So I work for one of the big firms. There's many, similar to law, there's many different firm sizes, shapes, specialties. Deloitte is one of the big firms, the largest consulting firm in the US. But there are many competitors. There's us, there's Booz Allen, KPMG. There's a ton of different options out there. And honestly, the possibilities are endless with consulting, which I didn't realize. I always assumed that if you're a consultant, it means that you are going to go to a company that makes money. You're going to tell them how to cut their costs, and you're going to tell them how to fire their people, and you're going to do that, and that's it. And you're going to leave. You're going to do studies and finance, and that's it. What I do is so totally out of that realm, and that is why I think I love it so much. So particularly with, we are brought in to help clients understand and solve their greatest challenges to help them achieve their goals, which is the most generic thing I could ever say. But from the governance perspective, they can really only do so much with the resources they have, the time they have, and the constraints they have based on the Constitution. And so what private firms do is the government solicits support from us. We come in and we answer that request for support. They look at all of the competition. They decide who's the best fit, depending on cost, scope, past performance, things like that. And then they choose somebody to complete that work. And it could be across many different industries. So I primarily focus on defense, but we support what's going on with the CDC and COVID right now. A lot of their creation and rollout. We support a lot of nonprofits, so I also work in that space as well. Higher education, so universities will hire consulting firms to have us come in, help them, maybe do a study to understand how they can become more efficient, attract a certain type of student population, things like that. And really all across the field, then your traditional consulting, which is working for a company in the Fortune 500 space and helping them analyze their books. But there are really kind of a wide variety of things that you can do. So, there's many options in the consulting field.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is so helpful. And I know that our students, because I think our students, because, I tend to think of it as like, oh, it's business, like you have to be in finance.
Right.
And, I say, no, like there's, more things you can do with that. So that was super helpful. So Genghis, I have another question for you from our chat. So how did your entrepreneurial interests inform or shape your English studies and your interest in becoming an educator? And so I think that connection between the sort of entrepreneurship and education is really interesting.
Okay, I'm gonna try to answer the question. It sounds like a little convoluted, but I'll give it a whirl. So I had family members who had their own businesses, and I knew that in my mind and in my heart, I I wanted to eventually own my own business. I know that I was reading something in Forbes the other day. I think they talked about how Black women right now are the #1 demographic in starting new businesses here in the United States. And so for me, it was, watching my grandfather who had a gas station, an uncle who owned a restaurant. Either you talked about consulting, I knew that I wanted to maybe do something through education, or just find a way to kind of make something my own, I guess, in this great big world. And so to be quite honest, as I said, I had thought a lot about that JD PhD, because I still knew I was interested in higher ed, but I still wanted to pursue law. And for me, law gave me hope of, I guess, possibly at one point in time, kind of having my own firm, and being able to fight for the causes that I kind of believed in. Personal heroes of mine were folks like, trying to think, like Thurgood Marshall. And so I wanted to plant my flag, if you will. And so for me, I guess, going through undergrad, I wanted to just kind of position myself, and I felt like English was broad enough, if you will, of a degree and focus area for me to kind of make a career path, because I didn't feel like my career path would look like everyone else's. I mean, there were people that came to Ohio State that were very focused. They knew they wanted to be a physician. They knew they wanted to be a veterinarian. I was not one of those people. So I needed something that was going to be broad and give me the kind of ability to kind of move on the fly. And so for me, that degree kind of helped me. And I just remember going over to, because I was famous for taking, when I was a grad student, taking classes in other specialty areas. I remember taking astronomy classes there. I knew I was not going to be an astronomer, but I took the classes. I mean, I would mosey over to the law library. I hope you guys are taking advantage of all these libraries, first of all. I think Oxley Hall was a library. I worked at Oxley Hall, if I'm not mistaken, for a little while. But I know there's a business library. I've moseyed over there as well. And so I knew that I knew that because of my love of spoken word and love of writing, that I think English was the correct. It was the best option for me, and I just kept plugging away, and that's how I kind of, I guess, got to where I am today. I can't say to you that I was 100% certain in undergrad that I would be in this position that I'm in right now, though.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's what I think is great. I feel the same way about my career. Like, I love what I do now, but like, if you had asked me at 18, if you had told me at 18, this is what I was doing, I would have thought that you'd hit your head. So, so I know what you mean. And I think that's kind of the beauty of the English degree in some ways, is to have that kind of ability to do that. So thank you. Carrie, a question for you is, and I thought this was a really interesting question ahead of time. I know a lot of managers find themselves not using their degree. And I think by that, they probably mean, and anyone can clarify if you're in the audience, not using directly the skills, or that managing has to do with other types of skills. So would you say that's true? Or like, do you think that your degrees do help you kind of as a manager?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that the answer is kind of twofold. One, I didn't come in as a manager, so I've kind of worked my way to where I've gotten today. And so I started as, what they call it, a consultant, and then, there's like your senior consultant, et cetera. So in those early stages of my career, that was all that I was doing, was using my degree, because we're crafting stories for our clients. We're helping them understand, what we're trying to articulate to them. We're developing content and materials, and especially with policy writing, which is kind of an art and a science at the same time. So utilizing that English background to be able to, write and articulate what I'm trying to say. A lot of what Genghis is saying with briefs, kind of very similar with policy writing. And so and opinion papers and white papers and things like that. So definitely used it really early in my career. As I've kind of transitioned to this more of a manager role, I think same thing, kind of surprisingly, because now I have to be able to communicate clearly with my team. And so at any given day, I'm managing 15 to 20 people. And so how can I tell them, what they should be doing? How can I articulate my vision for a product? And so having that English degree really taught me to be an analytical thinker, to communicate clearly, and to be able to share those thoughts and communicate with others. And so that's something that I find that I'm using every day. And especially in this virtual world where I can't just turn to the person next to me and say, can you get this done? I have to be able to tell them over the phone or via email, and explain to them what our thoughts are and make sure it's clear and concise. And so doing that is all based off of what I learned with my English degree.
That's awesome. Yes, I think so much of that, especially like what you're saying about COVID, like, and having to communicate in different ways, I think is true for all of us. I think email is the new kind of constant in all of our worlds. And how do you actually kind of clearly and concisely do that? And I mean, English in so many ways, as both of you have said, does that for us. So thank you so much. Question for both of you. As an English major, did you have to justify your major to future employers? And do you think it defined your career opportunities or limited them in any way? And so that's just one question that kind of came up.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. So I would say that was my biggest fear in undergrad and grad school was that, oh no, I have this humanities degree, like who will hire me? And I think my parents, my dad didn't go to college. My mom had a very serious finance background. And so she always was like, what are you going to do with this humanities degree? But I think when I was in the job market, it wasn't something that we ever really talked about, because it's all about understanding where you're driving towards, what you want to do, and then being able to articulate that. And so I always talked about it as a strength. I'm a well-rounded person. The people that I'm going to work with aren't all going to be these kind of robots who have this perfect cookie cutter background. And so it's okay to have, a different perspective and bring that perspective to the table. That's the best way to form teams. And so that's how I always talked about having my English degree is, I'm going to bring this different way of thinking to the table. And I'm going to kind of round out some of those harder finance backgrounds. And so it was something that I always turned into a positive when asked about. And it was never something that hindered me because I was able to use my resume and my work experience, my internships, to kind of supplement that degree.
Yeah, and I think my answer is very, very similar to Carrie's. Because my resume was always so robust, I didn't really have, those kind of issues, if you will. I can recall as a graduate student, I worked at, and I don't know if it's still there or not, the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing, and at Ohio State, and I volunteered with the Columbus Afrocentric School. I worked at the OSU Black Extension Center on Mount Vernon. I did a great deal of community work. I did a great deal of tutoring. So in terms of education, I had a lot of real world experience that went along with that degree. And I think that that's important, for people and undergrads to really think about, I always think about the degree is, it may open the door, but, you have to obviously walk through it, give your spiel, and, kind of really make a case to have a seat at the table. And so that falls on you. Of course, the weight of the Ohio State University, behind you and its alumni network is very helpful. But, of course, I think in that we can all see that there's a shift in the economy, and, there are changes, obviously, liberal arts, I think the value of a degree is, in flux. And so I think it's up to students to, think of creative ways to make certain that you don't have to justify, your degree.
Yeah, I think both of what you're saying is so helpful to think about, and I tell students this too, like never apologize for your English major, turn it into a strength, Carrie, like what you were saying, and Genghis too. It's about, getting experience in the fields that you want to work in and getting that kind of experience in different areas too. And so we had a follow-up question kind of about this, and then I'll ask a little bit about like networking and those internship experiences in a second. But a follow-up question came up with it, which was, if you have any advice for English majors, like, so this is a little more specific about like if they're interviewing for a job, is it good to have specific examples of content, like things that they might have worked on in their major, or talk about skills learned, or both? But kind of more about like if they were in an interview, if you were interviewing them, or maybe experiences that you had yourself interviewing, what they could talk about, or kind of what they could say more specifically.
I guess it would depend on the context. I can talk about when I interviewed. Again, I didn't put as much emphasis on, and it depended on the job I was interviewing for as well, right? So if as an educator looking to become an English teacher, I think that pretty much the degree speaks for itself. Of course, you can talk about your other interests. However, if you are going into, it depends on, I guess, what field you're going into, you may have to, justify your degree, and you may have to talk a little bit about how you've applied what you've learned, right? So application is really important, I think, in the real world, if you will. And so if I guess my advice would be to, I guess you have to really think about, because you're pouring so many resources into this thing, right? You should think about what your career pathway is, and just don't do what I did and kind of bump your head against the wall and $50,000 later in student loans, trying to really figure it out, and sit before some hiring panel and like, I guess you guys should hire me. Look, I have a degree. So I think it's good to do things purposefully, right? And so if you know that you're an English major but you're interested in law, you may want to think about that rhetoric and composition. You may want to think about, taking pre-law classes in the LSAT, and that form of writing. And so if you're getting interviewed as a potential candidate to go on to law school, you can talk a little bit about how your English degree, what you've done in preparation for that degree, how it applies to the field of law. And I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I would say kind of adding to that 3 core things. One, you need to be honest with yourself. So if you have an English degree and you want a job in the computer science or medical field, maybe that's not the best choice, right? It's not as transferable. It's not as easy to shift your English degree to the computer science or STEM fields. But there are ways that you can create kind of stepping stones to get where you want to go. So for me, research and volunteer experience were huge, especially when I tried to, get internships that I just wasn't qualified for, because they're just not as choosy in picking people. So volunteer experience kind of in that core field that you want to be in, or a field that's close to it that can help you drive towards where you want to go. And then I would say the last thing is networking is just so important. It sounds so cliche, but if you want to work in the law field, or if you want to work in consulting, Ohio State's network is huge. So look for someone who's in that field and set up an informational interview with them. And spend some time, sorry, my dog is choking in the background, spend some time just meeting with them, getting to know them, and you will be surprised how many people are willing to help you kind of achieve what you want to do. So don't be afraid to use LinkedIn, use that Ohio State network to your advantage.
Great. Yes, thank you. I think that's a great tip. And also just for students out there, remember that arts and sciences career success is always there to help you. And the Youngkin Career Services are always there to help you in terms of looking for internships, looking for those opportunities. I think Carrie makes a really good point about volunteer work or extracurricular work being important too. And so it's not just about work experience. There are many ways you can kind of develop those skills outside of academia. The way that Genghis was saying is really important, like showing how you apply those skills. And there are many, many ways to do that. So just to kind of pitch for all of that. So kind of related to what Carrie was saying about networking and internships. So what advice do you have about kind of networking? And especially one student asked, it's kind of hard to network in a pandemic, or a little bit harder in some ways because there aren't, events you can go to meet people. And so I guess what advice do you have about networking for kind of students who are graduating?
I would say I disagree with the student that said it's harder. To be honest, this is the perfect reason to slide into someone's DMs. You can't, you can't physically meet, right? So, no, to be honest, I do a lot of networking over Instagram, LinkedIn. There was just to give you an example, there was an attorney. He does bankruptcies for businesses, and like he has each bankruptcy he does, it's like $100,000 per transaction. This guy is like, he's like phenomenal. Anyway, I reached out, and what's funny is he graduated from Ohio. I read his LinkedIn profile, graduated from Ohio State, was from Cleveland. So guess what I led with? Hey, fellow Buckeye. We have some common interests, like, and I was genuinely interested in what he was doing. That's the kind I invited him out to dinner. A lot of times I, take these guys to, steakhouses. I'm a vegan, but, I'll sit there and watch them eat their rare steak over my salad. However, it's a great opportunity. And I also will add this, of course, we talked a little bit about this before everyone came on. Georgia is wide open, so it's okay for me to go go to a venue, sit down, and without my mask on, and eat and socialize. But I do a great deal of it. But to be honest with you, when I was in high school, I was a very shy person. I remember receiving an award for my ROTC class, and I skipped school that day because I didn't want to get up on stage and accept it in front of everybody. And so, I had to make some changes. And over the years, especially now as an entrepreneur, you can't fail to network well and expect to be successful. So networking is really important. I think this is a golden opportunity to network. And to be honest with you, you're going to hear a lot of no's. Okay. It's like, as an undergrad, me asking girls out on campus, I'm going to hear 9 no's, right? But, there's, that 10th one, she may say yes. So yeah, that's kind of how networking works. I think it's important. And I think you can still do it even in a pandemic. So, yeah.
Yeah, to add to that, so I hated networking when I still hate it. It's uncomfortable, it's weird, it's not an enjoyable experience, but it's a necessary evil. It's just kind of how the world works. And I totally agree with Genghis, like now is the perfect time to network because I am more connected to my computer than I've ever been. And so I will answer your email, whereas a year ago, I might have been traveling or I might have been on client site. And so I'm just not as responsive. So I'm there and available and I'm going to Zoom with you. And like a year ago, you could not get me on the phone. So, cause I just hated it. So I would say that's a good avenue, but I also think people think of networking as this like really formal, uncomfortable thing. And so I would say, set your intention, like know what you want to do and feel comfortable broadcasting that to everyone, like your dog walker, your parents, your cousins, like your professors, like tell them what you're looking for. And it makes it so much easier for them to connect you with someone. And that is a much more warmer, friendlier handoff for a networking connection if you have a common individual instead of kind of cold calling somebody on LinkedIn. And then the other thing I would say is every job is also a networking opportunity. So it's totally a myth that you network, you get that job and they're like, hey, that's it. I'm like going to do this job for the rest of my life. And so that's like at Deloitte, that's a core thing that we do. Like I didn't start in the position that I wanted to be in. I networked my way to there. And so if you, maybe you take an entry-level job that isn't your dream job, because you're going to meet all of these people who can connect you with your opportunities that you want to achieve. It's a stepping stone, right? Your career is totally a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to get your dream job in year 2 or year 5 or year 10, right? We're all striving for something. So don't be afraid to maybe go after jobs that don't make your heart flutter every single day, because they're going to create this network for you that you'll be able to utilize to grow yourself and move towards a position that you want to be at.
Yeah, I think it was Michael Jordan who said you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So
absolutely,
you absolutely have to get out there, network. You're going to hear a lot of no's, especially anyone that's interested in business or being an entrepreneur, or just applying for jobs. You have to have a thick skin and get out there and be told, no, you're stupid, get out my face, that's a dumb idea. I've heard it all, I'm gonna be honest with you. I had a career services guy in law school laugh in my face, literally, when I told him kind of what my dream was. And, it happens, but, networking, I think, is important, and it can help.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's super helpful. And I think for a few reasons, what stands out to me from that is, that just because it's a pandemic it actually means that there are more opportunities in some ways. Two, that students don't hesitate to reach out to people. It's not, I think some students feel like Carrie, like you said, it's very formal and it has to be this big thing. And, it can be just sending someone a message on LinkedIn, as Genghis said, he's on Instagram, go check him out on Instagram. And so I think that's a really good reminder that networking doesn't have to be this very, very intense thing. It can really just be reaching out to people. And, I think part of that too is both of you said, be kind to people, be nice to people. I think horizontal networking, so networking with people who are kind of at your level too. So at an internship or in an extracurricular, making those connections, those can, or Carrie said, people who might not necessarily be in your field, those are other ways to make connections. And so I think that's really important to remember as well. And plus, like Genghis said, I think it's really important to remember that everybody gets rejections. Everybody hears no. And so here are two very successful people sitting here in front of you telling you that they also don't love networking necessarily, and that they hear no too. And so just remember that that's kind of something that you'll hear, but don't let that be discouraging. And so I think that's really important as well.
I thought just networking as a student, I went to a lot of professors' office hours. Mm-hmm. For example, I was interested in law as an undergrad. I want to say I tried to make an appointment with the dean at the law school, and I want to say he saw me at the time and just sat in his office, and I told him I was interested, and it was political too. I knew I was going to apply. I said, you know what, I'm gonna make this guy remember me when I apply. So didn't really work out as well as I'd hoped, but politics. So networking is really important. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, be a good impression in people's mind, I think, or attempt that. I think that's so important too. So great lesson there. I guess kind of, we're getting close to time. And so I think what I would ask you is, we had a question. And so in the Q&A, and I'm going to turn this into a kind of larger question, but it was about what advice would you have for people who are applying now? So students who are kind of coming out into, and I realize too that, into the pandemic kind of job world, which is very different, but what advice would you give for people who are thinking about internships right now or thinking about jobs right now? How can you make yourself stand out in that kind of circumstance? What would you say to students who are really thinking about kind of their next steps in their career, and what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick this one off. So I would say things that my company is always, so let me pause and say, one, I think you need to do your research. There are industries that are thriving right now. There are industries that are dying right now. And so maybe now's not a good time to want to pursue, being a pilot or being in travel. So you have to think about, where is the economy going? You need to be, when I was in academics, I was really focused on my academics and I wasn't necessarily as connected to the real world. And so companies are looking for someone who understands what's happening in the world and has a good grasp on that and has some of that maturity. So think about those industries that are, hiring hand over fist. Like we are hiring like crazy because the government is spending a lot of money right now. So things like that, thinking about the industries that are doing that. I would also say, huge differentiators I'm looking for is someone who is able to, on paper, demonstrate that they have some work experience. So I would encourage you, even if it's, working at a Target, like get some work experience, like demonstrate to an employer that you go to work on time and you do what you're supposed to do and you have skills. It's really hard for us to apply to take someone who is laser focused on school, because we need to see that is balanced out. And then I would just say what we always tell everyone is be your authentic self. So there is this idea that you have to be this very cookie cutter person to get a job. And we're looking for diverse people because we serve a diverse group of people. And so, in an interview or on your resume, make sure that your true self is kind of shining through, because you never know what an employer is looking for. And then I think Genghis hit the nail on the head here, but always be comfortable. Like you are going to get a ton of rejection, and like that doesn't say anything about you. It's just what's going on in the market right now. And so be comfortable with that and keep pursuing it.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I forgot.
I keep muting myself. Yes. So the question was essentially like, what would you give advice for students who are looking for either internships or jobs now? Like, how can they kind of try to set themselves apart in some way, especially kind of in this very uncertain kind of time? And especially too, like, I mean, as somebody who, and I'd love to hear more about kind of the entrepreneurial like experience of that too, because like to me, that's so interesting. And I know there are some of our students who are really interested in saying exactly what you said, which is like, I want to work for myself. And like, I know it's really kind of, as you said, like that's hard work, but it can be really rewarding. And so I guess what would you say to students who are kind of interested in getting those experiences, but also might be interested in creating their own kinds of experience, like their own kinds of companies?
I guess I looked at, situations like Jeff Bezos or, Bill Gates or my Facebook guy, I forget his name right now, Zuckerberg. Those are all probably bad examples because I don't think any of them graduated from college, but they're billionaires, right? It's funny because when I was at Ohio State, I think I read a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? And so for me, this is the information age. Like all of the world's information is in the book or it's on Google. And so I did this in class, right? This is how I practice. And maybe I shouldn't share this with you guys, but everything's political, right? And so even the grading process, I found out, was a bit political. And so I talked to you a little bit about office hours earlier. I went to see all of my professors and I made Dean's List. But I mean, it's not that I didn't work hard, because I worked really hard. But I understood at the end of the day, there's the people element, right? And so it's the same with the job. It's the same with walking into a bank, though people don't do this anymore, and asking for a loan, or asking another law firm to partner with you, or winning a case, right? If, to be honest with you, juries don't like to rule against people they like, right? And so if the jury kind of, they kind of feel like there's a vibe, you may get get something for your client. And so things that I do personally, I read, there's books out on like the top 50 funniest jokes, right? And so I will go into interviews and I'll make the panelists laugh. I'm personable, right? So you have to think that, that panel was going to see, I don't know, let's just say 100 people. What is going to make you stand out? It's not going to be your degree, because in that pile is probably 100 people who are, if not as talented, more so, right? And so, I understood that I was going head to head with valedictorians, and there were people that, I'm not saying that I was, the smartest guy, but there were people that were smarter than me. There were people that were more attractive than me, but there wasn't anybody that was going to work harder than me. And so I had to express that and show that in the interview, that I was willing to outwork everyone else in the field. And so I think that the best thing that you can do is you can make certain that you stand out. And how you do that is kind of up to you. But I think that there is a wealth of information and knowledge in those books that you have to absolutely crack open, because you don't have to reinvent this wheel. It's already been invented. And you just have to, like I said, do the research, and you'll find resume writing skills, you'll find interviewing skills. And the best thing I could probably tell you, I wish I had done this. This is my last thing I'm going to advise you to do, is to go to, I think it was called Farley's. I might be wrong. I always wanted to do the live stand up. And I think if you can negotiate that, if you can negotiate, being booed, having tomatoes thrown at you, I think that you will survive an interview. And it's a very different life lesson, having a live crowd in your hand and having to interact with them. So that's my only advice.
I like the idea of stand up as the best interview prep. I mean, trial by fire, really, but that is very true, though, if you could handle that. But thank you both so much for this. This was so useful, and I think really goes to show that being, as Carrie said, your authentic self, and as Genghis said, putting yourself out there and saying what makes me special. And I always say there's no such thing as a boring English major, and there's no such thing as an English major who's the same. Everybody's different, and so it's thinking about your strengths, students, thinking about what makes you special and what makes you the best person for this job, no matter what it's going to be. I think is really helpful. And also, as Genghis said, there are many resources out there, including those at Ohio State. So remember that you can always contact me for resume advice, for cover letter advice, for interviewing advice. I've done mock interviews with students. I actually kind of love doing mock interviews with students. It's really fun. Arts and Sciences Career Success, York and Career Services. So just remember there's many kind of resources. And so let me just say thank you to our panelists. So thank you, Genghis and Carrie. This was so wonderful. I can't wait to share the recording on YouTube. I'll send it to both of you as soon as we have it. Susan, I don't know if you wanted to say a little, word at the end here too.
I just wanted to say thank you also. I really enjoyed hearing all of your detailed comments and advice, which I learn always from hearing people's stories, and I appreciate your sharing them. And what I am most taking away is how much the people at Ohio State really are what make this place special. We know that, but particularly in these days of the pandemic, sometimes we feel a little disconnected, but I just love the fact that you have talked so much about personal connections, the networking across alumni in different areas, and your specific experiences on campus, coming into a major late, coming to a major early, talking to your faculty and your professors in office hours, which, by the way, is still something I completely advise people to do too. And I'm always happy myself to talk to students as well. It's a great treat. And when you are a professor, to be able to talk. So just thank you so much for putting this sort of people back into our discussions and bringing it home for us in a really clear and so helpful and generous way. And I do hope, Genghis, that maybe someday you can have dinner again in Columbus. And if so, let me know. We'll meet somewhere. I would love to see you guys on campus. You too, Carrie. It's always nice to remember that we're going to be coming back to campus at some point. And to all the students, thank you for watching in person and maybe on YouTube. And we're so glad to have had this opportunity to be together. So thanks a lot. Yeah.
I know Ohio State has money, and so don't wait till the next pandemic to invite me.
I hear you.
I can honestly say that, honestly, Katie, please share my contact info. I'm happy to support anybody, and you're welcome to I'm in your network now, so feel free.
There you go.
Thank you so much for that offer. We definitely will. And again, thank you to both of you for coming, and thank you all to the attendees for this. And to those of you watching on YouTube later, here's a future shout out. So thank you, everyone, and have a really great evening. All right.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Go Bucks.